Okay, so this video is going to talk about relative clauses in Latin. If you haven't already watched the previous video on relative clauses and relative pronouns in English, and you are at all confused as to what these are, I would recommend watching it so you get a handle on this before you get started here. So the relative clause, just like in English, is going to be introduced by a relative pronoun, a word like who or which or that. And the relative pronoun in Latin is just going to be the word qui, quae, quod. And again, qui, quae, quod, these are the nominative singular endings that you learn. The rest of the forms you'll find on page 4 in your book, so if you can take a second to open your book up to page 4, that would be great. I've also copied them on this page right here. And you'll notice there are a lot of forms, obviously, but there is a pattern to which forms are which, and that I'll talk a little bit about. So qui, quae, quod we've already talked about. That's just the nominative form. The genitive form is this word cuius. Now the nice thing is it's the same for all three genders. Similarly, the dative singular, cui, is the same for all three genders as well. So if you can learn cuius and cui for genitive and dative singular, you have all 6 of these forms. The accusative singular, you just are going to have em, which is a traditional third declension ending for the accusative, and am, which is a traditional feminine first declension ending. Now, hopefully you remember that for neuter nouns, the nominative and accusative are always the same, so if you know the nominative is quod, then you're also going to know the accusative is quod. The ablative singular, and many of these subsequent forms are all traditional second and first declension endings. O is second declension, traditional. A is first declension, traditional, as is O. The same thing here. E, orum. Now instead of the traditional is, you have ibus, which is just a third declension dative and ablative ending, which hopefully you recognize as always being dative and ablative. And then you still have your miswriting here. You still have your os as an accusative plural. Same thing's true for the feminine. It goes I, arum, ibus, as, ibus, instead of I, arum, is, as, is. So again, if you can just remember that for all these forms, the dative and ablative plural are that third declension, ibus. Lastly, with the neuter, the one trick, quae, is the neuter nominative plural. One thing you can always remember is that the feminine nominative singular is always going to be the same as the neuter nominative plural for adjectives. You can also look here, quae, because it's a neuter noun, has the same nominative and accusative, and so it's going to be ae. The other forms, the ibises and the aurum, you could predict. So hopefully that was a helpful overview of how some of these forms work. Again, this is something that you're just going to practice, and the more practice you do, the easier it is to memorize. Okay, so the trick of relative pronouns. Relative pronouns, because they replace a previous word, have to have the same gender, so masculine, feminine, neuter, and number as the word they're going to replace. However, they're not going to necessarily have the same case as the word they replace, because the case of the relative pronoun is going to be determined by its own relative clause. And what I mean by that is you have 2 separate clauses here. I see the boy, and who loves you. So I see the boy, who loves you. I see the boy, boy is the direct object. Who loves you, who is the nominative subject. The word who is doing the action and it's replacing boy. So you can see here you want the nominative form of qui, even though the word that it replaces was in the accusative. Same issue pops up here. I see the boy whom you love. I see the boy. Boy is going to still be accusative because it's what I'm seeing. And then whom you love. In this clause, whom is going to be a direct object. And so as a result, if it's going to be a direct object, we need the accusative form. And so that's why it's em.